Yo, what's up guys? Have you ever wondered how to actually learn? How to actually, take some information, absorb it, understand it, and then use it straight away? I'm here to help you out. What I'm gonna actually show you is a 1 hour and 20 minutes recording from the program that I run. And in this recording, you'll see exactly how to approach this, how to take this bull by the horns, tame it, so you can achieve the goals that you set for yourself, right? Because learning coding is super simple once you understand the principles behind learning. Some people are skilled at learning, they know how to learn by default, like I was. I had this gift of understanding how to learn things, but some people don't have this, especially if you are a bit older and you've been in your career for many, many years. Maybe you don't even know how to learn. So in this video, you'll actually see what is the process that you have to take, how to put yourself into a situation where you can actually learn anything that you set your mind to. No matter if it's coding, another second language, whatever it might be, the process of learning is the same. And I'm not gonna be teaching this class actually. It's gonna be taught by Justin, which is an absolute master of learning. He knows how the brain actually works, and he's gonna decompose, I guess that's a word, how your brain actually works, so you know how to use your brain, which is the most powerful tool that you have available, so you can achieve your goals.
So the plan for today, I've got some slides to share with you. The main goal is just to share the formula for learning and take you through some points. And the main idea is to hopefully give you some ideas about maybe if you're missing something or other alternative ways to do it. At the end of all the slides, I've got your questions that you sent to Christian as well, that you asked in the Facebook group, and we can talk about each one of those. I thought it was more useful to go through the ideas that you asked about at the end, after we've discussed everything, so that there is some kind of like framework that we can work from, okay? But before we start, do any of you guys have any questions? The time for this that we're planning on is just to go for 60 minutes. So it's not going to be too much, not too long. I know some of you are at the end of the day. Anton, it looks like you're already at nighttime. Beth, you too. Like, what are the times by you guys? Is it nighttime, daytime? Like, where is everybody?
You go, Beth.
7 p.m. here.
Yeah, it's 1 p.m. where I'm at.
And here in Spain is 7 p.m.
Oh my God.
7 p.m. as well.
Okay. All right. So everybody's, well, so Beth, I take it you are East Coast, North America?
Yes.
All right. And then Milena, you're also in Europe as well?
Yes.
All right. Yeah, cool. And then Vlad's on the call, but Vlad, where are you? If you want to text, you're welcome to.
That's in Europe, Romania.
Romania as well. Okay. All right. Okay. So before we start, do you guys have any questions? Do you have questions about who I am? Because I'm going to leave it for now. Let's let the material speak for itself. My main job is to help you guys. So I'm not here to kind of like preach and be like, oh, and then at the end, buy my course. Like, it's not about that. It's like, let's try and find the problem. Let's try and find some solutions. That's it. So do you guys have any questions before we start? Otherwise, I'm just going to jump in. No? No questions? All right, let's go. Cool. All right. Boop, boop, boop. Let's go to present. Cool. All right. So, hey, it's the learning workshop. Woo! All right. So I kind of split it into 3 groups. So group number 1 is going to be the formula. There's a 5-step formula that is informed by a lot of the science around this that I organize together. And I run a lot of people through this formula. And from this 5 steps, we can then double click on anything in here and go even deeper. So if there's something that strikes you as like, oh, you know what, that's maybe something that I need to look at, and you want to ask about it later, we can double click on everything. But please remember that your brain can handle only a certain volume of information at one time. So one of the better things for you to do as well is just to stay focused on what are your top 3 takeaways from this session. So the formula, I would like to point out, should be one of the top 3 takeaways, because very few people in my experience learn like this. So it's very helpful. Okay. All right. So the second one is that I'm going to bring in some other ideas. I'm going to show you how the brain works. And so these other ideas are things that you could spice your learning with. So I want you to imagine that the formula is going to be like the main part of your food, like the meats, the potatoes. And the other ideas, it's kind of like the sauce, the spice, the whatever. Okay. All right. We've got another joiner. Sorry, 1 second. Who's this? Yak. Yak here. All right, cool. All right. And then I'm going to give you just some background. Like if you are having problems with learning and you are following all of these things, then it might be because of the foundations as well. So there are foundations that we need to look at. We cannot, for example, separate food from learning. There has been a lot of evidence in recent scientific research to show that gluten, for example, actually inhibits the hippocampus converting new memories. So for example, if you are on like a very heavy flour-based diet, it might be interesting for you to try to change it into something else and see how that works for you. So I'm not saying it's bad or it's good. I'm saying that, hey, we can change diet around. So I'll take you through some of the foundations, like right at the end, just a little bit of information. But it's something for you to think about as well, like what could work well. So for example, what does everybody know that really stops memory? What one thing that everybody likes in the world, or most people in the world like, but it stops memory?
Not sleeping.
Yeah,
I
sure.
don't.
Well, that's a negative. Let's go for the positive. Yeah, I'm beating around the bush now. Okay. What food or beverage stops memory? Let's put it that way.
Beer.
Alcohol.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, exactly. Exactly. And the way that it works in the brain is actually quite interesting. So we can talk about that if you want to, but do what you want. My job is not to tell you you're good, you're bad, but my job is to just give you some direction. So if you don't want to stop drinking alcohol, but you still want to learn, like there are things we can do. Okay. If you don't want to sleep, but you still want to learn, there are things that we can do. There are ways of manipulating what exists, but do you know how it all works? Okay. So let's get into it. So this is the formula. Okay. Number one is perception, patterning, deep process. I'm not going to read it. So all of this is informed by science. Step one is perception, which is largely linked with emotion and largely linked with your feelings of value. And so this is part of that mindset. You need to recognize if you are getting emotional with learning. One of the biggest problems with learning is people get stressed out. And so what happens is their logic, their rationality closes like a little eye. It gets scared as soon as high emotions start coming in, like fear, anxiety, I'm not enough, it just closes. So perception is just connected with your history. Why do I feel that this subject is difficult? Like I know nothing about this subject, so why am I getting like scared or whatever, panicked? And it's just about first noticing that. So we can talk about that later, but the connections between it. Patterning. Patterning is now we've gotten rid of the emotions. It's where have I seen this before? Okay, try and connect it with something that you already know. So Christian and I are working on being able to explain programming by comparing it to cooking, because cooking. Most people in the world already know cooking. So you can start to identify that these things are similar to each other. I already said that the formula is going to be like your meat and potatoes, your main part of the food. So already I've given you a metaphor and you're patterning it together. Okay. And that helps you to create hierarchy. So we'll talk about that later. But if you have never seen something before, that's when we go into step 3, which is deep processing. Now, deep processing as well, you can do it on something that you already know a little bit of. Anything that you want to know more of, that's when you go to step 3, but you can completely cut it out if you want to. Step 4, rehearsal. Knowing is not enough. We need to have a ratio of thinking to action. That's very important. So there's a rehearsal element, and we'll talk about that as well. Take action, notice your skill development. The reason why is because the science tells us that the brain behaves like a muscle. It's not, oh, I'm smart, I'm stupid. It's like, do you practice? Do you exercise this way of thinking? Do you exercise these skills in your brain? And then the last one is feedback. You need to have a feedback loop to improve fast. Okay, so we'll double click on all of these. If anyone has a question at any point in time, please let me know. So you can send a message privately on the chat box if you want it to be anonymous. If you don't want other people to know that you're asking the question, send it to me privately, that's fine. Or just publicly, just put it in the chat for everybody to see if you have a question. Otherwise, just unmute yourself and just ask the question. Okay. All right. So
I
let's
think
continue.
if you go back to the previous slide,
Oh no, now you're asking for so
sorry.
much.
So
This
I
one, the
think
formula, yeah.
yeah, I think it's gonna be good if you guys remember these things, because I'm kind of asking you to repeat certain things, or I'm showing you how, for example, arrays are actually things that you are seeing all the time in, for example, Facebook comments and stuff like that, or when I tell you to redo something or do it in a different way, and then the feedback, right, that you are getting from it. So I guess it's going to be important to have this in mind when I'm asking you to do those things, you know. It's just a side note to what you are saying, you know.
Cool. And so the interesting part is that programming language is very similar to learning other languages as well. So, you know, like if for example, you're learning Spanish and your first language is Japanese, you still have to go through all of these as well. So for a lot of people, perception, you know, they get frustrated because they get scared, like, oh, it's so much to learn. I'm never going to be able to do it. My teacher always said that I never was consistent, blah, blah, blah. You need to be able to get out of your head. And there are ways to do that. So we can double click on that if you are curious. Patterning. Oh, I noticed that, for example, the Spanish word for freedom is libertad, which is in English, it's liberty. Oh, that's interesting. So there's a connection there. You're like, oh, I've seen this before. Oh, okay, I know this. All right, that's interesting. Or, you know, when you don't know something, you go into deep processing and you pull it apart. And being able to really like take things apart as if you are examining a beautiful watch and you are taking each piece delicately and seeing where does it all go and how does it all connect. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But the idea is very simple. We can talk about this. Hector, who you saw at the beginning of the call, we've discussed this with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. We've discussed this with language learning as well. I have clients that use this for, you know, studying chemistry and radiation decay in chemistry, or French, Italian, Spanish. I've had Japanese learners, you know, so different languages work as well as physical things, as well as other topics. The brain follows a very similar pattern. So you can use this to learn anything, really. Okay, let's carry on. So the question time is really to do with your experience, okay? What have you noticed in your experience is your preference for learning? What have you been trained to do as well? And then what are your beliefs about what great learning looks like? Well, like, what does perfect learning look like? I said here great learning or fast learning, because a lot of people are obsessed at the moment with like, what's the one thing that I can do that can accelerate my learning, you know, that I can put it in my head, like the guy in Limitless, you know? And the truth is that we need to check these things, because these are the things that are going to be either red flags, like, whoa, we need to address this problem, this perception that you have, or it's going to be a validation, like, oh, that's a good perception to have. Okay, so let's quickly go through this. I want everybody to prepare an answer. So prepare an answer. Number one, in your experience, what has worked for you for learning? Okay, just a quick one sentence answer, so that when we give the answers, you know, we just go very fast. Okay, what has worked for you when learning anything? Okay, and then if there is a difference here, what is your preference? It might not be something that works very well, but it could be something that sorry, it could be something that let me just go back. There we go. Your preference could be just be something that you enjoy, but maybe it doesn't add to the learning experience. So if that's different from your experience, please put it in. How have you been trained to learn? as well? How have you been trained to learn? And I'm going to predict the answer because most schools teach people to study in the same way. And then the last one is, you know, what I want to ask this in a simple way, in a fast way, but this is very difficult. But it's just a question of like, do you have a version of perfect learning? And so if the answer is yes, you have this idea of perfect learning. Can you give me an example of who the perfect learner is? Who in your mind is the perfect learner? What makes them a perfect learner? 2 or 3 qualities of like what is a perfect learner? Okay, so we're going to go around to everybody quickly, just get some feedback. So let's ask the first question. Your experience with learning, okay? So Christian, you just wrote in repetition, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So everyone else, you're welcome to unmute yourself or just put it in the text. Beth, what's your experience with learning?
My experience with learning, as far as how I like to learn,
Sure.
hands-on learning.
Cool. Yeah, I remember your question. I'm looking forward to getting to your question actually. Cool. Anton, what about you?
Hi guys. So yeah, for me, it's, as Christian said, repetition, practice, and seeing things by practical examples, like seeing other people do the same thing that I want to learn.
That's very important. And I'm happy that you said that because if you go to like universities or schools, they don't necessarily give you examples to learn from. They'll
Yeah.
just be like, oh, you have to do this, this, and this. And there aren't actual samples for you to take inspiration from. So that's very
Yeah.
important. Yeah, good. Okay. Milena?
Okay, so for me, what works is first having a mentor, then having a positive feedback loop. So not so much discouragement. Then repetition that is spaced properly. Also, when I have a deep insight of how of the concept is offered. So I don't like when people hide, like the deep concept behind, like practical things. I really don't like that. I like when I can, like I know the whole subject, even if I'm discouraged doing it. I like to have access to it. And I think that's it. That's it for what's worked for me.
Good. Okay, I'm glad that you said that actually, because there's something in a question later that's going to come up that's going to validate what you're saying there as well. All right. Who's next? Who wants to go next?
I can. It's Jack.
Jack. Hi, Jack.
Hi. So for me, it's very visual. So similar to Anton in the sense that I would like to see examples of someone doing it from my level. But also from a seniority level, it's more about the why. So I want to know why you're doing it. So it makes sense to me that way. So I understand not to do it another way.
That's beautiful. I like it. Nice. And yeah, we're going back to this again. Schools don't really teach people to do this. They don't show that education works like this. So very simply put, if you have an agreement with this, even if you don't, you have to understand that what Anton and Jack were talking about here. I'm sure if you're familiar with the research, there's something called mirror neurons, which is the idea that our brain actually is wired to mimic others. So it's literally this idea of monkey see, monkey do. And guess what? We're monkeys. So it works like that. So giving yourself a good range of examples, not just one example repeated, but let's say a minimum of 3 examples, fantastic idea. So the more examples you can find, the better. And this might be a good idea to push Christian for more examples as well, because it will definitely develop his offering too. So this is a great idea, Christian. Are you?
I actually made
notes?
3 today. I made
Fantastic.
3 today.
Excellent.
I'll show them to you
Excellent.
later.
Wonderful, wonderful. Vlad, you're up. Do you have any insights on this, your experience?
Yeah, so I guess I was thinking about it. My main driver for learning is curiosity. guess the best environment for me is a community where you can, I guess, ask questions and get answers, and train your mind to think about the problem and see it in different perspectives. And again, for learning, yes, repetition, habits, I think, are the best way to approach this. Having a set period of time during the day where you just repeat the same task. Well, not repeat it, but work on a specific subject.
Yes.
I had an bad experience. Well, I don't have, it's not really a bad experience, but I usually tend to dive really deep in, and I can only focus at one subject at a time. I have so many other subjects to handle, and that's where I have to work.
So we can get into this with the deep processing part of it. You'll be able to see this as well, and this will actually come into Milena's point of view as well. So I'm very excited. So okay, cool. Let's bounce around. Sorry, let's bounce back. Where is it? There it is. Okay, let's bounce back to. I want to know what what is your idea of great learning? Let's skip to this one because I think most people have done this one. Does anyone have an answer for like what are the best qualities of a learner that they want to share very quickly before we continue? What are the qualities of a best learner?
Consistency and feedback.
Okay, consistency and feedback.
Patience.
Patience.
And not being afraid to make mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna reframe that, Anton, and say not being afraid to make mistakes is the concept of play as well.
Okay.
All right, so that's very interesting because someone said this earlier on, and we'll get to it later. It's the idea of emotions, especially with your perception of something. I can't remember who asked the question. It's later on. One of you asked the question about deep work, and this is very important here. Okay. Cool. Any other shares before we continue?
I think Vlad asked the question in the Facebook group about deep work.
Okay, so we'll jump into that in a second. Okay, cool. All right, well, so that was just a quick stop point. So if I tell you that you're going to learn a list of the 20 most populated countries in the world right now, I'm gonna walk you through how to do this. It's just a joke. I just want to find out what is your emotional response to that? How did you feel emotionally on a scale of 1 to 10 when I told you you're going to learn a list of the biggest countries in the world? Were you excited about that? Were you just like, oh man, fuck, I don't want to do that? You know, like what was your emotional response?
I was right away like, I'm not good with geography. I don't want to learn it.
And it's exactly this reason that I do this exercise with people where like I can teach it to you very quickly. I've done this in less than 5 minutes. Okay. The top 10 countries, because I've got a mnemonic system and blah, 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 but it doesn't matter. What's more important is to notice what emotion came up when I presented you with situation, and managing that emotion becomes very important with learning as well. And so this, of course, is part of that perception. So how do you feel on a scale of 1 to 10? Are you excited? Are you bored? Your reaction, your knee-jerk reaction emotions are things that you guys need to get under control if you want to become not a better learner, but a happier learner as well. If you want learning to be exciting for you, interesting for you, something that you do for free. You know, learning is not something that you have to dedicate time to. It's something that when you sit down, you're like, oh, I'm going to learn now. I'm so excited. You know, it's like a good book. If you've got 5 minutes at the bus stop, you want to learn. It's not like, oh, I should learn. So we want to change those feelings. So a lot of perception comes out of cognitive biases, if you're familiar with that. And we need to pay attention to that. And basically, it's separating your experience, the past that you have with this. So Beth said, like, oh, I'm not very good with geography. Anyone could be good with geography. Geography is so interesting, but your experience with teachers, with the subject, has like shadowed your future now. And so separating that away, finding good communities, good teachers, interesting topics, that can totally change it. And so there's the final one, the anticipatory stress, is actually a bigger thing to talk about. If we anticipate stress, we will feel stress. So the little graph that I've got in the corner there, that's very important. This was a pain perception test, okay, where they took something hot and they put it, or I think it was a pinch or something like that. The anticipation of the stress compared to the actual pain and then the recovery, the person in blue was just a normal person. So they anticipated the stress, they got stressed out just thinking about the pain. Then when they felt the pain, they felt it very high, and their recovery took quite long. The person at the bottom was actually a monk, and the monk wasn't anticipating, he was being very mindful of the stress. The stress during the pain was actually very low, and then the recovery period was very fast as well. So it's a very simple thing that if you practice anticipating stress, you are going to become more sensitive to stress, and that is going to change a lot of your learning as well. So there are experiences that you can do that are like meditation and whatever, that can help you a lot in this way. The first step to perception is just noticing what comes up, being aware of your own reactions. That's it. So every time that you are presented with something, you have to notice, oh, how am I feeling right now? Okay. So with perception, there's a good exercise called meta emotion. We can talk about that if you really want to. If anyone wants to double click on this, I'll go into it later. But for now, that's all I'm going to say about perception. Okay. So, why is it doing this? Ah.
I like how you're saying double click on that. It's
Ah.
so, yeah, it's such a good thing.
Well, and we'll talk about that. It comes in with the deep work where you actually get the big picture versus the microscopic perspective as well. So when I say double click, I'm like, let's go into the details, in more details, because you don't need to know a lot of this. You just need to get the gist, the general understanding. So, okay, number 2 is patterning, as we said. Associated information response. So what existing information do you have that you can connect with it? How much do you already know about this thing? So patterning comes back to this idea that people say babies are better learners than adults. Well, actually, they're not. Babies spend 5 years of their life learning about everything before they can move on to the next thing. Adults already have a lot of these things in their mind. So when you're talking about programming, sure, we can talk about it like cooking. We can talk about programming like living your day, or your bathroom routine could be the same as programming. You know, if hairy face, then shave. You put in an if clause if you need it. But you run a sequence. One action, one thing in your program is going to be more important than others. So if you can relate it to as much information as possible that already exists, you can start to predict what you need, or you can start to identify, oh, I've never seen this type of programming before, or this type of function. Oh, I guess it's similar to this. And that's what we're trying to look for. If you can identify this looks similar to this, that's it. All right. So I'm going to jump. Deep processing. Deep processing is based on the idea of how your brain really functions. A deep processing is about first identifying all the parts and then the relationships between the parts. Okay? Deep processing moves from deconstruction and then onto reconstruction. So we're asking you in deep processing to really dissect something. Like in school, if you had to cut open a frog or something like that and see all the insides, that's what we're asking you to do. And then Frankenstein that frog. Can you build a frog from other body parts from other frogs? If you are able to take it apart and put it back together, you have a thorough understanding of it. And doing this, you have to take action. So there's action in learning. You have to do actions in order to understand it. What those actions are, we can talk about later. But the idea is that we are trying to pull it apart, put it together. The more you can do that, the more you will understand the topic. You will understand each part, what is necessary, and its relationship to important. The relationship to each other. Okay, this is a big one. Does anyone have any questions so far, by the way, about any of the slides? Nope. All right. So, okay, let's keep going. So a quick example, and this is part of, Milena, this is what you were talking about. Christian, you also mentioned this before. So whenever we talk about this, we can talk about micro, especially. What are the smallest parts we can break this down into? Fine. Meso is in between micro and macro. Macro is, fine, what's the biggest unit? Micro is what is the smallest unit. And meso is going to be something in the middle. So within programming code, you can have like one specific key. And then the macro is going to be what does the whole set of code look like? And the meso could be like, okay, what does this group of functions do? And inside there, what is that sentence? So meso could be like meso layer 1, layer 2, layer 3. But it's your job to be able to group things together. Micro, meso, macro. I do add another one onto this for most people, but for us, it doesn't matter, which is, I say microscopic, mesoscopic, macroscopic, and the last one is telescopic. As in, put in a time variable and see it, how will this code behave 6 months in the future, let's say with a new update or something like that. So you can add in a telescopic view as well. How does it change over time? So when you're doing the micro, meso, and macro, you actually create a hierarchy. What is more important? What is less important? So a quick question for you is, if we are looking at the story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears, is everybody familiar with this story? Little girl goes into a house. The three bears live there, but they've taken a walk because their food is too hot. Okay. And she goes in and she eats their food. She tries one, it's too hot, one, it's too cold, one, it's just right. She tries to sit on the chairs. One is too big, one is too uncomfortable, the other one is just right, but she breaks it. And then the beds. So my question for you is very simple. Which information inside that story is going to be the most valuable information? So by asking this question, I'm asking you, can I change the chairs for cups of coffee? Would it change the story or not? Would the story remain the same? And the answer is yeah. It doesn't matter what she tries, as long as we've got this thread of, well, we've got a big bear, a medium bear, and a small bear. It doesn't matter that she eats the porridge and one is too hot and too cold. What matters is that she tries two of them and they're not good, and the third one is good for her. Okay. So this is to be able to define hierarchy, is to say what is the most important. Well, that we need to leave it there. Okay. Sequence is now the next step. Yes, it's the most important, but we can't only have that. We need to have something before, something after. Okay. So I want you to imagine that you are at a family dinner. Okay. Family dinners need to start with a good sequence first. Like the most important thing about the family dinner is going to be dinner, let's say. But if you just start with dinner and you say, welcome everybody, sit down, let's eat dinner. Okay, that's it, we're done. It doesn't really give you a lot of chance to create relationships or enhance your relationships or whatever. So family dinner, you come in, hey, do you want to drink? Cool. Do you want to start a conversation over there? Okay, everybody, let's come to the table. Let's have our first course, like a soup or something like that. And it starts with that, and it finishes with desserts, with coffees, with games, whatever. Because the sequence, it needs more than just the most important thing as well. Okay. People often, the best way to understand sequence is going to be exercise. If you're exercising, hierarchy will tell you, oh, do this one exercise, it's going to be the best one for you. Sure, but then you're going to miss out on a lot of good stuff as well. A lot of good stuff that's going to benefit you. All right. So on a personal level, it's really, how can you organize the information in a different way? Organizing the information in a different way is going to allow you to see different things, get different insights. So restructuring information is super important. It's not just like, oh, the information is organized in this way and you're finished. It's more the idea of, I've organized it in this way. Is there another way to organize this information? I wonder what Christian thinks about my organization. I wonder what Anton thinks. I wonder what Milena thinks. You can ask other people, how do they restructure their information? That's a little bit of an action step on this particular point, especially if you are stuck. If you are not happy with the way that you are structuring information, you can ask other people, how are they structuring information? So going back to the Goldilocks and the three bears, if you ask someone, what is the lesson of that story? What is the moral of that story? You know, I ask a lot of people and they say things like, oh, Goldilocks and the three bears. The lesson is don't break and enter. Don't go into another person's house. And that is taking it from the point of view that Goldilocks is the bad guy. But taking it from the point of view of the Goldilocks is the good guy, you can say, try something. And if it doesn't work, keep trying until you get what you want. So if the first one is too hot, don't stop trying. Try the next one. Oh, it's too cold. Don't stop trying. Try the next one. Oh, it's just right. So be persistent is the lesson if Goldilocks is the good guy. So it depends on perspective. We can arrange information to make sense in different ways. So that's important. Understand that there's always a different context. All right. Like I said, feel free to ask any questions. I'm just going to keep going through this. Once I've gone through these types of things, sorry, this last one is just because of the countries thing. The very simple point is once I've gone through all of this, then it's like, okay, now we can have this discussion and we can reference it back. So I want to have a good frame in your mind. So if you have ever been to Asia, you can say, well, I've been to this country and it kind of works in this way, so I can expect them to behave in this way as well. So if you've lived in Spain, you can expect people to have a similar passion for food in France, in Italy, in Portugal, and they do. You know, if you've lived in USA, then you know that Canada will have a similar way of thinking as well. If you've lived in Thailand, Indonesia is not a big stretch. But if you've never lived in an Asian country and you go to Thailand for the first time, it's going to be like a brain explosion. You will be blown away. You know, if you've never lived in Europe before, your first European country will blow your mind. You will experience an emotional shock. I experienced this. I'm currently in Los Angeles, and it's like walking around a movie set. I've never seen so many things before that are new that I've experienced in my life because I've watched movies. I'm like, holy cow, that's Pasadena. That's where they filmed The Big Bang Theory. No way. You know, it sounds stupid, but this is exactly what happens in the brain. All right. Rehearsal. So taking action is part of the learning process. Do not wait to take action. The very simple point is that we learn through action as well, and the action allows us to give feedback. So I don't want you to think about rote learning, like just do it again and just do it again, just repeat. I use rehearsal, and I use this picture here for a very specific purpose. When people prepare for a stage performance or for a movie performance, first they have a piece of paper and they start reading, and eventually they get off the paper. And then they start practicing with their partners, they start putting more emotion into it. And then they will maybe get changed and have like a practice audience. And then they will open, okay? So there's a lot of rehearsal that goes into it. And each level of rehearsal is different. Each one should be full engagement, okay? Instead of just repetition. A lot of the research shows the repetition doesn't work if it's not focused, if it's not quality repetition. So if you are repeating something and you notice that your brain keeps being distracted, stop. That is not quality repetition. You are starting to waste your time. And that's okay. We all have limits. So it's figuring out what is your limit and working on this rest recovery ratio. So we'll talk about that later. Okay. So I wanted to ask you about that in particular when we talk about rehearsal versus rote memorization. Did anybody have this experience in school where they taught you about rehearsal? Or was it the opposite? Was it that your teacher just said, do it again and do it again and do it again, and you had to repeat it until you learned it? So did anybody have the good experience? Did anyone have a good teacher that allowed you to give you this rehearsal thing? I want to hear about that. Anyone have good teachers in school with rehearsal?
I think not until college people had that deliberate approach.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but it's very true. The only schools that I hear this from are Swiss schools and some of the Scandinavian schools, not all of them. So some Swedish schools, not all Swedish schools. Most Finnish schools, but not all Finnish schools. So people just have a way of understanding the brain that comes from like 100 years ago, and we need to upgrade this. So a quick one for you, based on this as well, is the idea of rote repetition activates a particular neural protein that activates a certain memory. And actually, that protein bond in the neuron can be broken very easily. So it's not worth our time to just rote learn something, because it can actually, we can lose that connection very quickly. There is a receptor, a protein in the brain that is activated when things are emotional and experiential. And it's almost impossible to break that protein bond. So the idea is that the more emotional, the more experiential, the more fun, the more engaging we can make something, the better. And it's our responsibility to do this, because if our experience shows anything, is that our teachers have not been responsible for this. So now that we're old enough and ugly enough, we can do it ourselves. All right, let's move on. Cool. All right, so some keys, some ideas for you if you want to double click on rehearsal, deliberate and focused, fine. A good way to do this is to change your speed. Yeah, understand if you can go from like 1 is the slowest you can go and 10 is the fastest you can go. Play with your speed and start slowly and then build up speed. When you get to 10, you should be more or less automatic. All right. This is something that impacts your emotionality, which is prove your ability. Prove your ability to do something or not do something. Oh, I can't cook. Well, okay, cook me eggs 10 times. And if you fail 9 times out of 10 or 10 times out of 10, or whatever your failure rate you decide, then I'll agree with you that you failed. But until you can prove to me that you failed, I'm not going to believe it. And you should take that same belief and approach with yourself. Prove it to yourself. And what you notice is that actually, if you fail at a certain level, let's say our speed is 5 out of 10, and you fail, well, turn down your speed to 4 out of 10 and try again. And then 3 out of 10 and try again. And you will notice that success comes more with your challenge level. Are you at the appropriate challenge level? That's all. So I talk about this with progressive overload. Don't try and pick up 100 kilograms if you have never trained to pick up 100 kilograms. Start with 10 kilograms. After a week, or let's say 4 weeks, if we're talking about muscles, 4 weeks of training 10 kilograms, let's bump it up to 15, let's bump it up to 20, then 25, then 30. Then after a period of time, you're going to be able to pick up that 100 kilograms like it's no problem. So time is a big factor. Okay, how many times are you doing something? How much time do you have to dedicate to these things? Most people in a perfect world would perfectly be able to program their learning, but you have a life, you have demands. I have a new puppy that is stopping me from doing almost anything that I normally do, because I have to look after this kid, otherwise it pees and poops everywhere. So right now, I can't dedicate a lot of time, so I need to make the best choices. And that's what we were trying to get to with you as well. So the social aspect I'll talk about as well, but basically the more social you can make your rehearsal, the better it is. And multiple actions. Don't just train yourself to take one action in one way. All right. With rehearsal, we can isolate a skill, but then we can integrate the skill into other things. And then we can run a simulation, a practice run, if you will. So we can talk about that as well more if you want. And a good way for you to get around the emotions of this, data first. Okay, data first. So what do I mean by data first? The first thing is, can you just remember? Can you remember what to do? And then, okay, well, can you remember what to do at a high speed? So just go for, can you do what you need to do? Yes, you need a lot of time. Maybe you need a textbook next to you or something like that. Nobody cares about that. First, prove the basics and then go for the performance. So this is one of the things to help you. Isolate a skill first, and you can isolate a second skill, and then isolate a third skill. And when you're comfortable with each of those 3 skills, then you can integrate them together into one integrated practice where we repeat skill 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 10 times. And then you can simulate that. A simulate is just a type of practice run where nobody cares if you fail. All right. And then improvise is then going to be playing with it, being creative with it. And you don't have to wait until you're perfect to run through all of these. It's actually quite fun to isolate skills, and maybe you're getting, let's say, 70% accuracy, and then integrate them and notice how much your accuracy is, because maybe it's actually easier for you to get success when you integrate the skills, because that's how your brain works. Maybe you're a person who just needs a little bit of pressure so that you forget about your own stress, so that you get out of your own head. You just need a little bit of pressure around you. And then improvising, maybe you're just the person who prefers to play and learn by playing, and improvisation is going to be a place for you to go to. But it's still going to be good for you to isolate skills, still going to be good for you to integrate. So I like to jump between these 4. All right. Cool. Why is my slide not going to the next one? So these are a couple of things for you to do. All right. Journaling before and after. And when I say journaling, I mean writing down your plans for what you want to do before and after you've done it, repeating it 10 times. So if you are trying to do any skill, try and do it in a basic form first. So this is an example with language learning, okay? If you're learning a language, try write down the phrase, the word that you're trying to remember first. After that, then try write it and then speak it as well, you know? But you can also challenge yourself by writing it, okay, first. That's your data first. Then your performance is the idea of, like, many people are speaking to you, but you can still write it. So we're also talking about different ways that we can complicate the brain and still survive the stress. Okay. So I'm not going to get into this one too much right now because it's a little bit out of context for programming, but I wanted to bring it in because of this idea of, like, you can write it and you can write it fast and you can also listen at the same time. So we can actually block the brain's working memory into doing something, so it's almost like it's automatic. It's a natural process for us. All right. The final one is feedback. And this is a part of the formula that people usually have a big problem with. I need to say this. Don't be scared of feedback. A lot of people are scared that feedback has got to do with, like, what are my weaknesses? And somebody said this as well. I think, Milena, you said it about you want to find a role model that's going to give you positive feedback as well. Okay. So a very simple way to get around this is you guys funnel the feedback. You are the one who asks the person, like, what's your feedback? Bad question. Rather, do you have any suggestions on how I could do this better? Okay. And when they start to say, oh yeah, you just need to start from the beginning, you tell them that's not very helpful. What is the one thing that I can do that can really improve my code? What do you think is one thing that I can do to stop making this mistake? So your questions for the feedback, it's under your control. And that's a way for you to take control instead of waiting for, like, this kind-hearted person, this kind-hearted mentor who's going to handle you in the way that you want. You can start showing them the kind of feedback that you want. And then you train your coach, your teacher, whatever, to give you the feedback that you want. So I'm a big believer in this because I think, Milena, I'm the same as you. I am very sensitive, and I hate it when people say, yeah, you're doing that wrong. And then I'll stand up, look them in the face and tell them to fuck off. And instead, I'll stand up and say, now, oh, I'm doing it wrong. Well, tell me one thing that I can do to improve what I'm doing. Or, yeah, I understand that that's your opinion. I'm not in a place right now that I can take the feedback, so appreciate it. I'll ask you this question tomorrow when I feel better. But right now, if you give me more feedback, I'm going to punch you. But I don't want to punch you. I want to be your friend. So can we just chill out on the feedback? So help them moderate their feedback by knowing what you respond to and what you don't respond to. And I think that's a big deal. Okay. Because I mean, like we're all human. Sometimes you just don't feel like listening to someone telling you how terrible your code is or whatever. But the idea is that it's not criticism. Any feedback, you need to start it with this idea of the relationship between you and the person giving you feedback is about help. It's not about, I'm better than you. I wouldn't make this mistake. Like as soon as that relationship comes in, you need to turn it around. Okay. So noticing how you feel when people give you feedback and being able to then change what that person is doing by you asking the right questions. Okay. And limit it. Limit it. As soon as you start to feel any kind of negative emotion coming up, stop the feedback session right there. Take it and say, I need to think about this. I need to, like, I'll come back to you tomorrow. The main point is that feedback should be very limited, one or two things at most. Okay. And it's not reasonable for you to do a million pieces of feedback in one session. One or two main points. Stay with that. Okay. But if you're not ready for that, self-feedback is usually the best. Easy way to do this, record yourself. Make a video of yourself. Record your screen while you're typing and notice where your big problems are. Where are you stopping and thinking a lot because you don't remember what to do? Or where are you're jumping ahead because you're confident and then you realize that you made a mistake and you have to go back and change an entire section of code. Okay. So recording your screen and watching yourself code is a great way to do this. Okay. I've got an entire, I'm sorry to do this. Let me, I had no plan on doing this, but if you want more information about this, I have a section here. So I do like little audios, but this one is on the observer versus the participant. And this is what I was talking about before as well. Being able to notice when you are getting upset. Okay, your brain has two modes, the observer mode and the participant mode. And most of us feel too much. And so we protect ourselves from feeling by turning off sensations, not talking to people, etc. So we need to observe a lot more, and this is a good way to do it. Okay.
With that though, Justin, like
Yeah.
self is always best. Do you not feel like you can be too nice to yourself at the same time though, so you don't feel like you're going to progress?
That's a great
Like
question.
the whole idea for feedback is you need to get bruised a bit to understand what you're doing and what you're doing wrong. If you're gonna be I can do that better next time, I know, silly me, you're not gonna really get over your hurdles, are you?
So remember, yeah, so I agree with you 100%. And the way around that is prove it. Prove it. So you've got two measurement systems that I tell everybody to have. And the one measurement system is going to be inside. How do I feel? Do I feel good? And so that is the feedback to you to make you feel good. Like, oh, I'll be better next time. I'll be fine. Like that feels great, but you know what? You're still going to be shit. So what is your external measurement? So you've got a thermometer inside your body for feelings, and that is super important. You need to check that. One of the worst things that people have is this whole idea of like, especially the British version of like stiff upper lip, like, come on, just bite down and you can do it and just suffer a little bit. And like, no, fuck that. Feel good about what you're doing because you're going to engage the brain better. But you need to be honest with yourself, and having an external measurement is the best way to do it. Can you prove that you can do this? Can you show me 10 times out of 10 or 9 times out of 10 that you are successful? If the answer is no, then you need to get that external marker before you can say this. So if you say, you'll do better next time, I'm a little bit tired. Okay, well then try sleeping and doing it again. Did it change it? No. Well, then it wasn't your being tired. It's clearly, this is too difficult a progression for you. Take it down a notch. So there is this level of kindness that you need to have with yourself, but it's more measured and mathematical than you think. Okay. And so this idea of like, I'm okay, I'm fine, I will learn. Show yourself that you can learn. Most people don't have an awareness of how well they learn or how they learn. Like I've been in the industry for over like 15 years now. And one of the biggest things that I see is people fool themselves into thinking that they're great at doing something. So I've got a friend. First time I met him, he's like, oh yeah, I've traveled the world. I've been to 50 different countries. I pick up languages really quickly. I'm like, no shit. Which languages? And he's like, oh, a little bit French, a little bit Spanish, blah, blah, blah. And I just say something like, ¿Dónde aprendiste español? And he's like, yeah, prove it. Can you prove it? And if not, then moderate your opinion of yourself. Or if not, take action to then be able to to have your opinion and your ability match. And that's the biggest thing, because overconfidence is just as much of a problem as underconfidence. So accurate confidence. And then be confident in building your ability, and your confidence will build as well. So there are these 2 points that come hand in hand. Does that make sense? Does that address that issue as well? Awesome. Yeah, I get really excited about that question as well, because that was a big problem for me. Like, how do you be honest with yourself? The answer is 2 measurements. 2 measurements.
I what about if you give too brutal of a self feedback? For example, I try to draw something and I don't do it well, and then I'm saying, no, you're not picking up the pencil ever again. You know, like that.
Yeah.
That, like, I'm learning to get over a lot of things like that. But yeah, what do you do when the opposite is the case? Like, how do you find objectivity? You know, like, to be able to pick yourself up.
I mean, so the easiest way to talk about this is to say, like, everybody has some trauma around being perfect. And so if you pick up a pencil and you're terrible your first time at drawing, like, being kind to yourself and saying, it's the first time, I've never trained this. And if you ask professionals what is their number one recommendation for getting good at something, it's repetition, it's practice and consistent practice. And so keeping that in mind, ask yourself questions like, am I being too harsh with myself? Yes. How many times did I draw this? 1 time. Is there something that's easy for me to draw to build up my skill? Yes. Guaranteed, you know? And then after that, it's how many times have I practiced this? Show yourself, practice 10 times. And each time you draw it, change 1 thing so that you can get better. And seeing your progression from the first time that you're drawing something to the 10th time, you need to notice, what is your response? Are you still being brutal with yourself? Well, then, you know, it's time to start addressing that self-image. And that goes beyond learning. That goes into trauma resolution work. You know, that's a big deal. You know, a lot of us, like, I'm someone who, I tried to kill myself twice when I was younger, when I was 18 and when I was 20, because I did not match the image of perfection that other people had. I was too brutal with myself. And I understand that. I had to go to therapy for a very long time before I could start being kind to myself as well. So it is a long road. I understand this. But the idea is very simple. It's that if you don't give something a chance, you'll never see it grow. And so if you want something to grow, just be like, yeah, I'm probably not good at drawing. Why? Because I've never tried to draw, because I've never practiced drawing. So, okay, give yourself a schedule, 10 repetitions of something to make a judgment. So step 1 is hold back your brutal criticism, let's say, until you have 10 data points to judge yourself by. That's a good way to see it. And noticing how your data points change. Did I improve between 1 and 2, between 1 and 5, between 1 and 10? And so this system of kind of like measuring your attempts is actually a way that you prove to your emotional mind that actually you can improve, that your skill is better. And also to say, like, oh, I'm not good. We also need to say, better than who? It's that simple. So if I say, oh, my Spanish is terrible, well, compared to who? Who am I comparing myself to? You know, who doesn't speak Spanish here? Hands up. Who does not speak Spanish? I'm better than you guys, sure. But who speaks Spanish fluently here? Yeah, I suck compared to you. So there is this idea of relative value that I think that we also can talk about. So relative value is important. You know, you're never going to be better than everyone in the world, and you're never going to be worse than anyone in the world. So finding a place where you can be better than some people and worse than some people, that's a good place to be. Okay. So Milena, when you draw something, for example, ask a 6-year-old next to you to draw as well. And you're going to, I promise you're going to be 100 times better than that 6-year-old. But the idea is, you know, relative value, number 1. Number 2, some kind of like scale or gradation to be able to see your attempts. And this is one of the biggest things that you can do, is create a distance between you and your judgments as well. Just create time and data points between you and your personal opinions about it. Prove it to yourself. Does that answer that question as well? Because that actually goes back to what you were saying as well, Jack. You know, with this idea of like being too kind for yourself. Prove it. Put time and data points in between your kindness. because again, it's creating a track record or portfolio to be able to prove your ability. There's nothing like proof to raise your confidence. Okay. All right. I'm gonna buzz through these super fast because I know that we're a little bit over time, so I do apologize. If anyone has to leave, I don't hold it against you. So deliberate, slow system is always better. Always better to do consistent, regular feedback. Okay, feedback is always on your rehearsal, so that should also address that, Milena. It's your feedback is not on your first attempts. Your feedback is on your rehearsal attempts. Okay. So just a quick review. Before you take action, you should have the persistent perception and patterning. While you're taking action, that's part of your deep processing, your rehearsal, and your post-action, your post-learning is feedback. Okay, so that's the system. That's my formula that I use for everyone. That's based on a lot of the neuroscience that's out there, as well as the evidence from my years of it being a teacher as well. So these are just a few other points. And I think this is going to be the second thing that I ask you to pay attention to. So number one is the formula. Number two is this. Our brain is social. The number one reason for the evolution of our intelligence is social relationships. Number two, our brain is emotional, more emotional than logical. Okay. So the idea is that we need to tie our emotions. And of course, pleasure, joy, curiosity. We can double click on emotions as well. If you go into my audios that I've got, I talk about all of this as well if you want some extra content. The third one, the brain is context dependent. And I think this is that idea of relative value. Okay. If you feel that you are worthless, change your context, you'll probably be very worthwhile. So in South Africa, where I was raised, I always thought I was ugly. And then straight away, as a white man, I went to Indonesia, and all of a sudden women started calling me beautiful and comparing me to Josh Harnett. And I was like, what? I look nothing like that guy. What the hell? But what it did for my ego, to change my context was amazing. Lived in London for a long time. No one looked at me twice. Attractiveness, they were like, yeah, normal guy. Moved to Los Angeles, man, it's a different story because people in different places look in different ways and they value different things, and so find a context that matches who you naturally are as well, where you naturally are in your progressions. So if your context is for a particular style, that's a very important thing. So if we're putting this context dependent idea with learning, that's super important. If you want to go to a country and travel there, don't learn all the days of the week for the language points. Learn how to order in a restaurant. That is much more valuable to you, and it'll be much more enjoyable to learn. Okay, so context dependent. So let's go next ones. Okay, the brain and the body are linked. 80% of all the information in your brain comes from your eyes. 80% of your information in your brain is visual. So when people say they're visual learners or kinesthetic, it's horseshit. It's absolute horseshit. 80% of all the information is from your eyes. Okay, but there's a large part of your brain that is also connected with your hands. Okay, there's a large portion of your brain that's connected with your face. And so we can talk about this a little bit later, but do not separate the body from the brain. There's actually a theory called embodied cognition, which is you think with your entire body. And I want you to think about that. We can double click on that if you want, but it's an interesting point to mention. So when we come into practice, we can talk about that. Okay. But I want you to also notice, how much time do you spend planning or thinking? How much time do you spend doing? And how much time do you spend reflecting on what you've done? So my suggestion is a 1 to 5 to 1 ratio. Let's say 1 unit of time thinking, 5 doing, and 1 reflecting. So the idea is if I spend 10 minutes planning, then I'll spend 50 minutes doing and 10 minutes reflecting. Okay, 1 minute doing, 1 minute thinking, 5 minutes doing, 1 minute reflecting. So a ratio of your learning is also important. All right. So here's a few principles for you. Externalize the mind. Don't just think about something, speak it. Don't just think about something, write it down. Don't just think about something, tell the person what you're thinking. So don't trust that voice in your head to be the best way to actually think about something. Externalize your mind. Don't assume, prove. And we talked about that already. Okay. Random connections are fantastic. The more you can connect in your brain, the better. And the more random it is, fantastic. Your brain will remember random, strange connections. Okay. Think about systems don't isolate parts. Okay. The whole part of deeper processing was about seeing the connections between all the things that exist. Okay. And then the last one is visual spatial. Try and add your actions and what you see in there. Small things for you. Who has colored pens that they write notes with? Different colored pens, different colored highlighters. The brain loves color. It's not a childish thing. It's actually a natural thing. Your brain is attracted to bright colors. So go for bright colors in your notes. Most important things, make them red, because your brain is attracted to red more than anything else. That's why on your phone, they've got, where's my phone? That's why on your phone, your notifications are in red, because the brain is largely attracted to red, just straight away. Okay. Yes. What was that documentary? The social something. You know the one I'm talking, Netflix documentary? Yeah. Social Dilemma. Thank you, wife. Haha. All right. Moving on. Meta learning. So everything that I taught you about is actually observing how to learn. And so if you want to take your learning to another level, it's about learning how to learn and being aware of how you personally learn best to develop your competencies. And your competencies are built up of little skills. Like, can I make a website? Well, that's built up of little skills, okay? Your ability, your competency is then the collection of skills, and your ability to actually know all of this is based on your meta learning level as well. This is just a demonstration. It's from research into what's known as the homunculus, which part of the brain is responsible for what. And as you can see, the part of the brain that's responsible for the tongue, it actually has got a greater sense of connection. You think about all of the movements that your tongue can perform, and you're sensitive to compared to your foot, right? So the hands and the face take up more parts of the brain to use than almost the entire body. So how we can use that in our learning, speaking a lot more, using your hands a lot more, which is manipulating objects, writing notes, things like that. That's where there's studies that come back that show people who write notes actually retain information better. Okay. This was just something small, but it's just food for thought that you can retain more information by interacting with people. You can retain more information by having a visual component to what you're doing. Okay. So there's a lot of arguments against this particular learning pyramid, but it just works on a basic premise. The brain is social. Interact with other people when you're learning. All right. The concept of stress. Too much stress and your brain shuts down. Not enough stress, your brain is bored. You need an appropriate amount of stress. Stress is not bad. And to kind of talk about this as well, the idea is sleep is important, recovery is important. Okay. So think about it like the gym. You go to the gym, you overload. So when you're learning, you're overloading your working memory, your brain. Okay. You need to also take in good nutrition. If you're eating the wrong foods, for example, like if you're drinking a lot while you're learning, you're not going to retain that information. But then you need to have a recovery period. So knowing when enough is too much, and then coming back to it and recovering, sleeping, resting, meditating, etc., reflecting on something is good as well. All right. And there was some science behind this that showed that when people had the opportunity to either do nothing, to study the material again, or to sleep, the people who slept actually tested better than everyone else on the second and third days because they retained that information. Because sleep is where your brain will change the information from your short-term to your long-term memory. Okay, so when you've had enough, go for a quick nap. When you're tired, sleep. That's super important for learning. And so quickly, the 4 pillars of health. Nutrition, there's a lot of studies behind what's known as the MIND diet, which is classical Mediterranean diets, fish, salads, etc., berries, blah, 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 healthy fats. I'm sure you've heard this all before. If you haven't, let us know. We'll talk about it. Movement, the number one movement that will impact your brain is going to be cardio. because it's going to increase nutritional load to the brain, oxygen load to the brain, etc. Okay. Stillness, meditation, reflecting, taking time to calm down. Even if you're just sitting in a chair with nothing in front of you, no phone or anything, for just 10 minutes. Give yourself time to calm down. I have some suggestions for this if you want, but I'll leave it there. Sleep as well, very important. We've talked about this already. Okay, so just quickly addressing your questions, and then we'll open it up to anyone who wants to stay. So Beth, this was you. One of the biggest struggles with learning is knowing, figuring out what to do next, as in which project should I start working on. Loops are something that's always a little bit confusing. Is there a certain way to know which one is best to use in each situation? For this reason, you struggle with the operators, how to set them up properly. So just avoid them altogether. Okay. So in this case, Beth, I think if we take it on this idea of, number one, defining what is your context, and number two, getting your peer group around you. So whether that is your mentors like Christian, or whether that is your fellow programmers, to then do recordings. So you can see them going through these kind of processes as well, all right? So like it's a bit confusing, so then what do? You avoid them. My advice for anyone who avoids anything is to ask people how they overcome this as well. Crowdsource your problem. Don't ask them for solutions. Ask them what their solution was. Don't say, what should I do? What did you do? How did you figure this out? How did you find a way to do this? Like, where do you see this being? Okay, so that's super important. But figuring out what to do next, are you talking specifically in the program, or are you talking about in general?
I'm talking about just in general. Like, I have a tendency to just know where to go next, what my next step is.
Mm-hmm. So with this, there's 2 points that I would recommend. Is number one is increase your planning or pre-action time, okay? Which would mean like asking yourself the question in that pre-action time of like, where do I want to go? And if you can't answer that right now, one of the best ways to kind of focus on this is to say, what kind of things do I like? And go towards what you like. That's why emotions are very much tied in with life decisions, with a lot of stuff. Your emotional brain will actually provide you the fuel. So instead of saying like, I don't know what to do next, be like, what do I like doing? Let me go more there. What do I want to be able to do? Let me go there. Okay. And figuring out your steps and your sequencing there. So for example, if you're learning coding right now, the coding of a website, well, what websites do you really like? What websites do you really want to be able to give to people? And figuring that out, and then figuring out, okay, cool. Well, in that, I need to learn how to do this particular function or this setup. And if you don't need those functions or those, throw it away. Who gives a shit? You don't have to be, God of everything. You definitely don't need to be like the best teacher in this regard or in that regard. You just need to be someone who provides value for other people in a way that you're happy with. Okay. And if I can talk more about this, it's about like stabilizing first before going into passions. People always say like, find your passion. Well, if you've got no money coming in, who gives a shit about passion? Sorry if I'm swearing too much. I'm enjoying the conversation. But stabilizing can also be in that way, like what's around me, what do I need in order to give value to the people that I'm seeing around me who are coming to me. So start with, what are my passions? Start with, what do the people around me value or need? It's a great way to start, is my advice. But otherwise, I would start asking for other people to do Loom recordings of their own programming, so you can see specifically also in the program. Okay. So I hope that answered your question. If you want to go deeper, if you want to ask more questions, like let's hit it after the next 3. Okay. All right. So Christian said, right now I'm really interested in, so this was the deep work. I believe that the most important thing I need to focus on right now, concentration and avoiding distractions. A lot of people talk about this, especially in today's world. We talk about the cult of productivity. People are obsessed with being productive and sitting down for 100 hours and just writing code and being the most productive person you can be. If you want to focus on deep work, you also need to focus on getting there progressively. So how long can you hold concentration for? If you can only hold concentration for 5 minutes before your brain is distracted, then the next day, try for 6 minutes. The next day, try for 7 minutes. But one of the easiest ways to short circuit this is to be engaged in something you enjoy. Okay. So if you like playing video games, guess what? Hours are going to slip by. And before you realize it, you're like, holy crap, I've just spent an entire day playing, Prince of Persia. What the hell happened to my day? And that's the type of feeling that we want. We want to do that by projecting whatever feelings we have onto what we're trying to learn. So finding a way to fall in love with your subject is actually the main point. Finding a way to project feelings of curiosity, of play, of interest, of enjoyment. Okay. So for a lot of people, that sounds a bit woo-woo. I agree with you, but it's just a very simple thing of like, the more you can interact with people as well and start to appreciate things, the better. So in the beginning, nobody likes drinking beer. Nobody likes drinking coffee. Nobody likes drinking, what's the other one I was going to say? Whiskey. You have to learn to appreciate these things, and you develop an appreciation for these things. And so concentration can be short-circuited by rather having an enjoyment of that thing. So not everybody is going to be able to concentrate on programming. For some people, their brain will disconnect after 30 seconds. Okay. Talking about art. How many people will talk about art for 6 hours? But I hated it when I was younger. I had to develop an appreciation for it. And so to develop appreciation is one of the biggest things you can do. And so developing appreciation for programming, even in your spare time, look at what other people are doing with programming. Wow, that's super cool. Let me look at their source code. What are they doing on the back end? What does that look like? Oh, that's interesting. Just looking and appreciating. And that is your nutrition for your studies, actually. It'll be very fulfilling for you to develop that appreciation. So that's how I recommend short-circuiting concentration. But the idea is that concentration as well is something that you can train, and so taking it as progressive overload. All right. Oof, nice big one from Kevin. Okay. So Kevin's question is very much what we talked about. So he says here, sorry, let me highlight what he says here. I think that I understand the topic, and then all of a sudden it goes from understanding to complete confusion with nothing in between. Okay. Feels like my mind gets tied in a knot. Okay. And this inhibits learning even further. The very simple point here is that deep work is the thing that's needed here. A little bit more rehearsal, perhaps. So if something doesn't connect, if all of a sudden you're lost, asking questions like, why am I lost? What is going on? Oh, sorry. Let me just quickly let Jack in the room. I think he got disconnected. Yeah. Sorry, Melina. Milena, I just saw your Zoom chat, so I apologize. I'm just looking at it now. Let me address it after this quickly. Okay, so very simply put, again, it comes back to this idea of like he gets lost. All of a sudden, he knows something and then he doesn't. Okay, it's understanding the relationships between two things. So deep processing is what I'd recommend here, which is a deconstruction. He needs to go deeper into these types of things. That's what I'd recommend for Kevin here. And part of that deconstruction is noticing, what do other people do? What are the working parts involved? Why is this thing here and not there? So imagine it like you're taking apart a clock and asking questions about each piece of the clock. You go as deep as you can and then put it back together. And each time you do this, you will be able to go deeper and deeper into the subject matter. Okay. Cool. And the last one was, I was looking for some advice as someone who is a visual learner, learning by being proactive, doing it as I'm being taught, reading from a screen. I feel like it just doesn't sink in. How do you learn? This is a very typical point, okay? Someone who's a visual learner, everyone's visual. Someone who learns by being proactive. Everybody prefers being active with learning. One of the parts of death of learning is sitting at a desk, okay, and just being spoken to. It is the death of learning. So that doesn't mean we can't learn. By the way, I think that's it for my slides. So I'm going to stop my slideshow. The idea, very simply put, is that if you are learning, let's say you are watching Christian present on something, my advice is to watch that first at a do a pre-watch of that video at like triple speed. Okay, and there are Chrome extensions or extensions onto your things that you can do. Watch it at triple speed so you see a map of all of the information that he's giving you. You don't try and understand all the information, you just watch. Okay, and then the second time you watch it at a regular speed with your notepad and your pen, paying attention to the areas that you know you just heard are going to be the focus points for you. And then when you're writing your notes, spend a little bit of time with your notes to try to say it in your own words. Try and say it in your own way. It's called reformulation. It's a very popular way to do it. But just because you are watching a video, it doesn't mean you cannot take an action. So interact with the video by actually writing things down. Okay. And then after the video, take action. Go and write your code. Something that I have actually recommended to people in the past is write code with pen and paper. So it's very easy to type, but when you pen and paper your code, like you are forced to recall as much information as possible. And it has greater neurological engagement when you're writing it with pen and paper. Color your functions with different colors. Like your whilst clauses can be yellow, you know, your start stop clauses could be pink or something like that, you know, but coloring your clauses so you can actually visualize this stuff. And if I can share one more thing with you guys, put it up on a wall. The bigger, the better. Okay, if you're trying to learn a particular line of code or something like that, use the wall space that you've got, like a whiteboard. Stick A4 pieces of paper up there and put it up big on your wall, you know, as if it's a big whiteboard. You know, there's those pictures of like guys with their conspiracy theories on their boards. You want it to look like that. Hang on. What am I doing? Oh, sorry, my spelling is out. I haven't had my cup of coffee for today. Okay. So if you see like people who have these, we want it to look like this. The more three-dimensional you can make it, the better. So if it's a pin board with lots of like string to show the connections between things, the better. The more you can visualize your brain's ability to be able to kind of put it all together, the better. Yeah, the brain is flat. It's true. The brain, the earth is flat, Christian. Okay. So the more you can do this, the better.